Welcome to this episode of They Learn You Win, the podcast from Skooks. I'm your host, David Wentworth, and today's guest is Paul Smith, who is head of training for Baker Concrete Construction. Paul spent nearly 30 years designing, implementing, and evaluating instruction in both public, private, and even nonprofit sectors. So he's got a lot of experience. He's currently focused on developing industry-leading professional development programs in the areas of structured experiential learning, pre-boarding of interns, efficient acquisition training, micro-learning solutions, and curating development resources. So for this episode, I talked to Paul about learning on the job, and Paul is a recognized leader on the topic. He presents at conferences, he's written numerous trade articles, and most relevant to this episode, he's the author of the book, Learning While Working, Structuring Your On-the-Job Training. We sat down at the ATD conference in Washington, D.C. to discuss what it takes to help people learn and practice on the job. So listen in. So, Paul, thanks for joining me. I really like doing these face-to-face, in-person podcasts. I don't get to do them very often. So thanks for taking some time out to sit with me. Before we get into it, I'd want you to do a little bit, tell us about Baker Construction and what you guys are all about.
Yeah, and I agree. I like, in this age of the virtual meetings, it is nice every now and again to actually be in person,
right?
Talk to the face. But so Baker Construction is the nation's largest concrete construction company. We don't do roads and bridges and things like that. We do, commercial buildings. We do, apartments. We do office buildings, but we also do major structures like we're currently right now working on the Titans football stadium, the Buffalo Bills football stadium. I think we did the Broncos and the Bengals stadiums and stuff. If you're familiar, down in Fort Lauderdale, there's the big Guitar Hard Rock Hotel. Yeah, we help build that. Wow. We do work for Disney and NASA and all kinds of stuff. But we're the nation's largest by far. We're all over the country. Started about 60 years ago out of just a couple of brothers started doing concrete in Ohio, and it's now grown to 8,000 some people, $2.5 billion a year corporation.
Wow.
And so, it's not just the size of the organization that is cool. It is that the organization, even though it's grown to that size, has not lost track of where it came from. It's stayed very grounded in its roots. Mm-hmm. In fact, Dan Baker, who founded our company, his grandfather, Elmer Baker, had a saying that still is posted all over and still a mantra that we use, is that to be effective, you have to have 2 degrees, one from the classroom and one from the trenches. And if you only are experienced in one or the other, you're not fully knowledgeable. You're not well prepared. And so that drives almost everything that Baker does.
I love that story. We have it's funny, now that you mention it, we have a few customers that's a similar story where, when the name of the company is Baker Construction, well, there are bakers that started this. And then we have a Friedman's Hardware, which is run by the Friedmans. And we've got Pilot Catastrophe, which you think, Pilot. No, that's actually their name. Yeah. So it's great to hear that lineage and that growth. And the other thing about what you guys do, I think, is it's just, there's the impact, right? I think the idea that of those 8,000 people, they can drive around, walk around and say, right there, that thing right there,
exactly.
And a lot of those things are pretty impressive to look at. So I like the aspect of that. So speaking of those, 8,000 people, the reason why we're here is obviously talking about learning and development. And I think you offer a unique perspective because very often I'm doing conference presentations and webinars, and always on people's minds is how do we do more on the job experiential learning? We know how impactful it is. We know how great it is. People enjoy it. But then in these very frontline heavy industries like retail, like construction, like restaurant, how do we do that in the limited time that we have, the access that we have to people? So if we can just start talking about some of the things that you put in place, some of the principles that you apply.
Well, one of the first things that I want to mention is that I'm a big fan of, it's kind of becoming a little bit of a dated term now, I suppose, but structured on-the-job training. And the reason I say dated is because training is kind of a misnomer. It's really more about learning and development. But SOJT is the common acronym that still gets used. But it's kind of an interchangeable concept to things like experiential learning, competency-based learning, these kind of concepts. But the important thing to understand about those things is it does not do away with traditional training, but it takes what we tend to do with traditional training and puts it into a more impactful scenario on the job. And I like to make that distinction because a lot of times when people start talking about on-the-job training or traditional training, they want to swing a pendulum from one to the other. And way too often when we talk about training itself, we revert to the classic, put people in a classroom, teach them some stuff. Maybe they'll get some hands-on activity, but ultimately it's in this room. And then we get done in the room and we send them out to see if they can sink or swim. But then if people say, well, we have an on-the-job training program, what that often is we're going to send you out. Maybe you've had some classroom prep, maybe not a whole lot, but we send you out and you're going to sit with somebody. You're going to ride along with somebody. You're going to observe somebody. And that person is going to, quote, show you the ropes. But while this is effective because you're in the context of the job you're going to be doing, the downside of that is that it's all left into the hands of whoever is doing that mentoring in that scenario. How effective are they? Are they actually teaching the things that the company wants taught? Or are they doing, well, they're going to tell you this, but here's how I do this kind of thing.
That's a favorite part.
Or, how happy are they with their job? If maybe they once,
on that given day.
Yeah, on that given day. Yeah, because maybe they once were a very happy loper and something has happened, then now they're not. And so that's going to come out in what they're doing. But the point is, even when they get done with that on the job training, whatever that looks like, you say, okay, well, you're done with that. The entity still really has no grasp on what did they learn, what were they taught, what can they do, and so the structured on the job training concept says, no, over here we had the classroom where we thought about what are our learning objectives and what are we going to do for the lessons and what it's going to be in the PowerPoint, what's going to be in the handout. We put all this thought into putting all the training stuff together. And that's good. We should do that. But then we just assume that the expert person we lined them up with for on the job just has it covered.
Right.
And we have to take that same concept, that mentality of structuring, of mapping what we want done that we do in the classroom and put it on the job. And so when we set out to say, all right, we're going to have a structured on the job training program, what we're really talking about is first saying, what does this person need to know to do the job? Okay, once they're done with whatever the training program looks like, what is it we really expect them to be able to do? And when we say what do we expect them to do, it's what makes somebody competent in this job. Not just that they heard somebody say some stuff to them, but that they are competent in doing those things. And then the next question is, how do we determine the competency? And the kind of cliche example, but the example I like to use is if you say, well, in this job, they need to be competent in using Excel. What does that mean?
Right.
That doesn't, they need to be able to open it. They need to be, you know what? Generally, when we say something like they need to be competent using Excel, what we really mean is there are some specific work-related things that they need to do in Excel. So the competency isn't that they can use Excel. The competency is that they can do that specific work-related thing. Excel just happens to be the tool. And if they don't know how to use Excel, well, now you got to teach them some Excel stuff so they can do that thing that's required of the job. So, but the competency isn't Excel, it's the output. So if you start off and you make that list, you think about it like, again, what we do in the classroom, what is the learning outcome? What do we expect when this class is done? The learner will be able to blah, 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 blah. We don't do that when we send them out to the on-the-job stuff. But if we take our time to do that, what do we expect them to be competent to do at the end? We start with that. Now, both the learner and the person that they're assigned to have that as a guide. They can use that as a template that they can say, oh, well, they want me to show you this stuff here. All right, well, let's start with this and then let's do this. And depending on what the job is, we might jump around because the opportunities will present themselves differently. But still, I have this whole list of stuff and we're going to go over all of this stuff and you're going to demonstrate you can do it.
That's the key piece right there, right? The end piece, isn't it?
Yep.
And when we talk about these specific environments, a lot of times you're very pressed for people's time. How do we make the most of it? And they feel like that's the part where it gets cut off. Like we're gonna run on the assumption that the classroom training was good enough because they got the answers right.
Yes.
And then we're gonna assume that the subject matter expert showed them all the things, and you put that all together, and they will do the thing. And then we can save the time by not actually watching and making
Yes.
sure those things are happening.
Yes.
And ultimately, that's the most critical thing. It almost doesn't matter if what they got on the assessment in the classroom, if by the time you get to the actual doing of the job. There's so much stuff in what you said. One of the first things I want to call it is I love that you make the distinction, because I'm always talking about this distinction between training, learning, and development.
Yep. Three separate
very
concepts.
distinct things that work together, that layer on top of each other, but they get thrown around so much as the same thing, interchangeable, and they're definitely not. So I love to hear that, in the context of your employees and the way you approach this, you definitely think about that differently. In
the construction world, we obviously have a need for a lot of training, but in that context, training is what you're actually doing, like, how you're swinging the hammer correctly. You're not using your wrist, that you're using your arm correctly, because you don't want the injury. There's a reason, there's a why, but there's a skill to this. And that's the training aspect, training you to do this specific thing. But then we get into the development of somebody where, if you have a frontline field leader, foreman or whatever, you're really good at swinging the hammer. Now you're going to lead the people who are swinging hammers. Do you have these skills? And that's not just something you get trained to do. That's something you develop into. And that takes, to your point, that takes more of a time commitment. And that's where some organizations go off the rails. Ultimately, there's nothing I described that people don't intuitively know. I mean, I did not say anything revolutionary that I doubt anyone's listening or watching and going, oh, wow, I never thought of that. No, this is pretty basic stuff.
Yeah.
But we don't do it for a variety of other reasons. And one of the first big reasons is time. The next big reason is cost.
Yep.
We know this would be effective, but it would just take so much time, and it's going to cost so much. Where can we cut corners on that? And we can. There are always ways to cut corners. However, each time you cut a corner, you shrink down the success of what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's, a big reason why I wanted to talk to you, because, your organization, you don't have some unseen luxury that others don't have, or that allows you to do this, where they say, well, we can't do that because you're in the same position as most other companies. You're just trying to figure out a way to do this with what you have. And our own research has found that one of the biggest challenges frontline employees, and this is from the mouths of the frontline employees themselves, one of the things they face is there's not enough opportunity to practice and apply the skills that I've been given. And it's true. You're talking about a lot of hourly workers. How do we squeeze this stuff in when they're on the clock? And the mantra over and over again is the payoff of allocating just that much more time, because whatever that time costs you, clearly there's a cost involved, but whatever that time costs you, the payoff of having people be able to actually practice the things that you're trying to get them to do and demonstrate that they can do it would far outweigh, in the outcomes.
Absolutely.
It's just very hard to make that commitment and make that change.
Well, one of the things that has to happen, and I mean, even in our organization, in construction, the time literally is money. And every time you take any worker out of production for any reason, training or otherwise, you're costing money because they're not producing. We build these big buildings, but we agree to a contract of a timeline and a number of people, and we've said we're going to get this done by this date, and every time you pull somebody out of the mix, you risk throwing a wrench in some of that or slowing something down, and if we don't keep to the letter of the contract, and money can come out of our pocket. We don't want that to happen. And so even though we're this big organization in the eyes of some, when it gets down to the individual worker, we do have the same struggle of how do you make time to do these kind of things. But that's again where the structured on the job training model, when done correctly, can actually address this beautifully, because a lot of times we will still approach, and I say we in the broad sense, companies will approach training as an add-on, especially if it's somebody who's already in a role doing a job.
Right.
And you say, okay, now we're gonna train you on doing this. Well, it's an add-on. You're doing your stuff, and we're gonna train you this. Well, even if we're training them to do something they're already doing, it's still seen as a burden. It's an add-on. It's an expense or a takeaway from what they're doing. When in fact, structured on the job training is about no. It's merging the two together. You are training while you're doing. In fact, I'll put in a plug for my book. My book is Learning While Working.
Yeah.
That's the actual name of the book. because that is the concept. That it's not something that you're supposed to be working and learning stuff. No. You are learning while you're working. And not only is that more efficient in the sense of, okay, now we're not taking time away from the job for you to be trained because you're being trained while you're doing what you're doing, but it also creates this really immediate sense of relevance to the content and me as an individual worker. That, when you have them in orientation or you're doing stuff in a classroom, you're asking them to just in their head be imagining, this is how this applies to me, this is what it does. But when I'm learning it in the context of physically standing there doing it at a factory, at a terminal, at a job site, using equipment, whatever, I'm in the context of doing this job, and what I'm learning makes complete total sense because I'm right here doing it right now.
Yeah.
And I think, some people like to talk about training adults like it's this mystical thing. Well, there's adult learning theory. And I actually was a high school teacher before I got into working in the business world. And I actually, many years ago, worked a lot with children, teaching lessons to children. And my experience is there's very little difference, actually. And in fact, there are some object lessons, some examples I use with children that I now use with adults. And they work just as well. But one of the things that I think about a lot is when we were in high school, math classes especially, there would always be stuff, the teachers writing stuff on the blackboard, and we're sitting there, we're trying to process this. And somebody would raise their hand and say, when do I need to know this? Why do I need to know this?
Am I ever going to use algebra?
And the teacher, sometimes would say, because it'll be on the test. Okay, well, that's a legitimate reason, but it tells me I only need to remember it until the test.
That's about as good as because I said so.
Yeah, but that question, why do I need to know this? Why does this matter to me? Is the same question that adults ask too.
I talk about this all the time, and it's, I'm not the only one, obviously, but the whole what's in it for me and like trying to destigmatize that phrase. It comes out when people say it, it sounds like, well, that's selfish. But this is literally how human beings approach everything that happens in their lives on a daily basis, either consciously or subconsciously. You're immediately going, why am I doing or not doing this? And what's the benefit or outcome of this thing? So you have to be able to then answer that question for people whenever you're presenting them with something. And then you get into that. You've mentioned the word so many times. It's important context. It's everything, right? Then all of a sudden you get the what's in it for me.
Yep.
And going back to your hammer thing, it's like something small like that, where it's like, you just need to know how to do this. Okay, but here's the why. And even if maybe they don't ask why out loud, but they're maybe still thinking, oh, so that you don't injure yourself. That seems like a really good outcome. I always say that, like, people worry about compliance training and how, it's always boring and it's always this, but it's like, no matter what the compliance training need is, it's born out of some necessity. There is a reason why. There's a business reason why. There's an individual reason why.
Yes.
Put it out there. It can't just be, oh, the reason why is because we get in trouble if you don't.
Because OSHA says so.
Right. It has to be, this is why it's important to you. This is why it's important to us. On that topic, because clearly in your industry, safety, compliance,
absolutely,
huge.
Yes.
How does safety, because it's life or limb sometimes, I think, in what you're doing.
Literally.
How do you work that in? Is any of that, because it's hard to make that sort of really on the job. Like, how does that blend or cross?
No, actually, it's extremely, it's prevalent in everything we do. In fact, at our organization, we have a concept called SSQP, which is safety, schedule, quality, productivity, these 4 areas. And we say that those have to be balanced, the balanced SSQP. Safety, of course, is huge, but it's huge not just because we have to. It's huge because we want every worker to go home safely. We want everyone to be effective. We don't want anyone injured in any way whatsoever. But safety on its own is not enough. We also have to monitor be mindful of our schedule, make sure we're on track. We have to make sure the quality of our product is solid and good, because if it's not, you have to go back and redo it again. And again, when we do a contract for a job, we bid it based on doing the work one time. If we have to go back and redo the work, well, that's coming out of our pocket. And again, we don't want to do that. And then productivity is, how well, it's not the schedule decides, what we're doing when. Productivity is how well are we doing it? How quick are we doing it? In worker hours, how fast are we getting this done? And if you push any of those up, above the others, throw it out of balance, then you jeopardize the others. So if we say, oh, we're behind schedule, oh, pick it up, just pick it up. And that's the mantra. Well, now you risk safety issues, you risk quality issues. Sure. And if you risk the quality issues, you got the rework that may happen. And now we've got the schedule is actually farther out of whack, and our productivity went through the basement. So it's the idea that these 4 concepts have to be imbalanced, and that's not just taught in the classroom. That's on the job site that those concepts have to be emphasized.
Yeah.
Actually, I heard somebody in our DC office just last week made the comment that I thought was really poignant when it comes to safety. It said that I need to know what I'm doing on the job site because I have no right to injure or cause injury to somebody else, just like they have no right to cause injury to me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's a very interesting way to look at it. Because we do preach the you are your brother's keeper mentality.
Sure.
But that mindset I thought was really a good way to look at it.
Because that sort of expands the what's in it for me, right? That safety isn't just about your own personal safety and the kind of work that your employees do. It's definitely going to be very team related. Mm-hmm. And I like that you're talking about it from a very human place, right? And that just makes sense. But even if you had to be like a, strict business results only, there's still, okay, well, if our safety incidents are down, that saves us money from whether it's insurance or lawsuits or anything that goes with that, or the lost productivity.
And it helps get us jobs too, because when we're bidding on jobs, the safety record of the company oftentimes is one of the things that a potential customer or a general contractor looks at. In fact, there are some industries that we participate in that have requirements of your safety record has to be at this number or lower, incident ratios and stuff. And so, there's obviously a very legitimate business motivation to want that as well. No business stays in business if they're not doing business.
Right. And also you become an employer of choice. If you're really good at what you want to do, where do you want to work? The place where people are not getting hurt.
Well, and as with any construction company, we have people come, we have people go. Sometimes it's called turnover. In construction, it's a little bit of a misnomer because you'll have a crew working on a job, and then that job gets done, and so then if there's not an immediate job for all of those people to go to, then some of those people aren't on the payroll until the next job, and then they're back up and going. But even if we have people who will say, I'm going to get a few cents more going over to work at this other company, we have a lot of instances where those people then come back to our company because they find that old adage of the grass is greener on the other side isn't really true. And I can make a few cents more over here, but working for this company, they actually respect me. They actually treat me like a human being, not just as a number who swings a hammer. That is not, I'd like to say that's all because of how good a job we do with training. But no, that's just the culture of the company.
Right.
That goes back to what I was saying before about how the company has never lost sense of its identity as to of who it is, where it came from, has not lost those roots even as it has grown to the size of the company that it is, and that shows in all of these other ways of how people at the company are treated.
Yeah, well, and clearly, your learning team is an engine of that culture, right? It's you're helping to drive and develop and sustain that culture, so that's obviously a critical piece. And I think what you're pointing out is so important because even outside of your industry, if you look at things like restaurant, like retail, where there is a lot of turnover and these jobs are seen as sort of transitory, companies are finding if we do more to support and develop people, they do stay longer, and while they're there, they do better. They perform better. And then when they do leave, which is going to happen in a lot of cases, they're happier about their time and they become brand ambassadors or what have you, but they maybe come back in some other capacity. So I think that's it. It's, again, some of these benefits that don't show up on maybe a spreadsheet that need to be considered when you're taking that kind of approach. I wanted to come back to the structured on the job training, because something else that people run into in those environments is, yes, you want to do some of that job shadowing, that, I'm on the floor, retail, restaurant, construction, show me the ropes, that kind of thing. I think everyone would agree that sometimes the person who's really good at a specific job might not be the person to tell someone else how to do it. Yeah. Like you see it in like software development, where they'll take an engineer and make them a manager because there's nowhere else to put them. How do you guys figure out like, okay, this is someone who should have someone shadow? Are they self-selecting? Are you selecting? Are you giving them training on how to do that?
Well, the model that we have adopted, and in all honesty, we're still working through getting it fully implemented. But the model we've adopted is sort of a two-tier approach, where we've got some guidance and some established things from the I'll say the corporate level, but the broader business level. But then we empower the local entity to really do the lead on the delivery of the learning for their individuals. And part of that is because different parts of the country have different geographic needs, but also our company has different lines of business. That, if you're training somebody to work on a wastewater treatment plant, some that they're going to learn is going to be overlapping, but they're going to have some more unique things than crew individuals who are working on a nuclear power plant. And so there has to be some fluidity there. And so with that in mind, we've tried to create a scenario in which we empower the local level as much as possible to deliver and drive those things that impact their people the most, which means some of the stuff that's done in this location may look a little different than some of the stuff that's done in this location, in the nuances of things. But then at the core is the things that we've agreed upon as an organization. And so that's kind of how we go about approaching some of that.
I got you. And something else that's interesting to me is, given the nature of the jobs, right? The come and go, the time periods, and sometimes the space between. As you assemble a team for a new project, what's the internal mechanism like for like sort of the skills that are available to you? Because I'm assuming each job has different needs.
Yeah.
You need maybe more of these kind of people versus these kind of people. Do you guys yet have like sort of a handle on, hey, I can take a snapshot and see what's available to me, and then do you have a mechanism to close any gaps with the learning and development if you have them?
Yeah, well, with every kind of job, there's a certain, we go through the bidding process when we're trying to get a job, and based on experience, for the most part, of similar kind of jobs, we know that we're going to need this size of a crew. And that's going to mean this type of leadership structure. We're going to need to have these type of professionals either on site or readily adjacent to the site, all that kind of stuff. If we're doing a job that we haven't done that kind of work before, then we use market research, and we use other ways of tracking down the information so that we can step into those things. We don't step into them blind. Right. I mean, we try to map all that stuff out. What is the support structure going to be needed to make this happen before we ever get the job? It's part of the planning ahead for the job and getting the bid in the first place. So a lot of that has already been decided before we've even been awarded the contract, when that's been mapped out. Now, that doesn't mean that everything has been accounted for. And when we talk about, training things, for example, there will be some of that allowed for in what's done to get a job, but there will always be a need for ongoing support and ongoing development and ongoing enhancement of individuals who are currently working on a job site. You were saying before about individuals who, okay, you're really good at this, and now we're going to make you this. Well, that probably wasn't talked about before we got the job the person's working on. And so, okay, so now we're going to make this person this. What are we going to do to help them with this? And so, those things come up, and then, we deal with those as they need to be addressed. But we have tried to put together a sort of I'll call it a matrix of development. Based off a large part off the designs out of the book, The Leadership Pipeline, and try to identify different levels of position, I should say. And then there's the pivot point where you go from one position to the other. And at that pivot point, that's where, we have to say, okay, if we're going to take you from this to this, what is it we have to be doing with you in that pivot point to be getting you able and ready to do this thing that we're asking you to go do? So some of that can seem a little more reactionary, but it's not like knee-jerk. Oh, right now there's a development plan. There's organization to that, but still it's driven a bit by the need of what we need for jobs, what the company needs. We need more people in this kind of role. Okay, we identify these people here have this skill set, and so we're going to approach them, and those that want to move over into this, okay, cool. And then we'll give you the training to step over into that. So it's a little responsive in that way. But we're trying to be as proactive as possible with those things. And in another scenario where it's not a construction kind of scenario, where it's a fast food restaurant, or it's a hotel housekeeping, whatever, the same basic concept applies, where, okay, we have this many people working in this capacity, this many work in this capacity, this many work in this capacity, and somebody has to be managing that talent, has to be saying, okay, now what would happen? I mean, first of all, if we grow, what would we need to support that growth? But also, what would happen if, we've got 10 people that in this function, what would happen if 3 of them left? Well, we'd have to replace them. Okay, do we have those 3 in the row below? Well, who would they, and start, one of the concepts that our company also has, it's not unique to our company, but it's a really good concept, is if you want to move up, you need to be thinking about who's going to take your place, so that you're actually mentoring somebody else to step into your role, that you're not just thinking about yourself of, hey, I want to shoot for something higher. That's cool. We encourage that. Go for that. However, always be thinking about, if you do step up into something else, who have you prepared to follow you, to come after you? That's an expectation. That is an element of a structured on-the-job training. Because if I'm a leader and I'm trying to prepare somebody else to do what I'm doing, I have to define what it is that I do. What do you need to know to be able to do this? What do you need to be able to demonstrate that you can do? All that stuff I said before about demonstrating the competencies. I have to do that with the person that I'm preparing to come after me. It's the same model.
Honestly, it's a great concept, and it may not be unique, but I do not hear that very often at all in that sort of internal mobility discussion about, okay, what about that element of it? So I think that's a great point to make. As we sort of wrap up here, I want to come back to the book, Learning While Working, because it conceptually, to me, it's something I've talked about a lot, is the more we can get to a point where learning doesn't feel like something that is separate from the job. And that's just how it's been ingrained both in employees and organizations. That's the way we've always done it. So that's how it's seen. We're never going to flip the whole switch in a short period of time. But the better we can get at making learning feel like it is the job, it's one more tool in my toolkit to help me do my job, the better we're going to be. So are there any other core principles you want to touch on from the book before we go?
Frankly, what I tell people is talking about how to do structure on the job training is actually very simple. Implementing it is very tough. Yes. Both, what we were talking about before with the time and the money and just the buy-in. Because when you start talking about doing something that you're saying, what are the expected outcomes? Now you have to get everybody that's a player in that conversation to agree on what your list of expected outcomes are. And that in and of itself can be a challenge. But yeah, the steps I listed before, that's the basics of it. The thing that is the other crucial piece of this, though, is it doesn't matter, whether it's structure on job training or anything, it doesn't matter how good your training program is. But with structure on job training, it is crucially important. There has to be something on that back end that when you've completed this, when you've done this, when you've demonstrated you're competent in these areas, there has to be something that you get. And not just like a pay bump or reward, but that you say, okay, if you want to be considered for this role, you have to have completed this structure on the job training program, for example. And if you don't go through this program, you won't be considered for this role. There has to be a very direct business connection of some kind. I'll give you an actual example. We have a program that's targeted to our foreman level individuals, and it's a 5-month program that only 4 days of that 5 months are in a classroom. The rest of it's all on the job. But those 4 classroom days are mandatory. You have to attend them because the point of them is to introduce some new concepts, stretch their thinking, get them to get away from the work and put themselves in a situation where you challenge them to think differently about some things. And so they have to attend those. Well, we had one of these rounds of sessions, I think it was actually here in DC too, where we had an individual that one day showed up an hour late for one of the sessions. And when he showed up, he's an hour late. And we're like, what's the deal? And he says, well, they're having some issues with one of their cars. And so he's carpooling with his wife and he had to drop her off in traffic, of course, in the DC area is horrendous. And so totally understand how this could happen, but that's not the point. The point was, no, you have to be here. And then he says, oh, and by the way, I'm going to have to leave an hour early because I have to go pick her up. Okay. So then I speak with his leader and tell him this is what's happened. Without any prompting from me, the leader contacted the individual and said, look, I'm thinking of promoting you from foreman into this higher level role, but I can't do that if I can't depend on you to find reliable transportation. Now, in this instance, you could have done an Uber and we would have covered it. You could have done a taxi. We would have covered it. There are so many other alternatives for how you could have handled this scenario and been on time, but you didn't do that.
Right. You
just decided, I don't need to be there. And I can't promote you to this other role if that's your mindset.
Yeah.
Now that conversation had nothing to do with what was going on in the training itself. A little maybe, but the point being, it was that leader who outside, beyond the scope of that training, made that training a very serious business connected concept. And the next session, that guy was the first one there, even there before the instructors, because he got the message. But that connection from the organization, from the business of making it serious. This isn't just something you're going through and check, good job, you're done, gold star. This has a serious, legitimate, professional business tie-in to your future success. And when the organization communicates that, makes a huge difference.
Huge difference. I mean, it just changes the perspective of training is, it's this thing I got to get to, and it doesn't really matter.
That's why I said it's good. It's absolutely important for structure on the job training, but for any training. The reason I say it's so important for structure on the job training is because one of the issues that can happen with structure on the job training, and as I said, this other program, 5 months, only 4 days in the classroom, we see it here, is learners can get off topic, get off track.
It gets too informal.
Yeah, because the first phase of that program, they go to a class, and then 2-3 weeks, they go back to their job and they apply things that we did that are very unique. I could go on to a whole thing about that, but very targeted each individual learner. They're designed for them to leave that room and go right back to their job, implementing stuff on their unique job site in whatever role capacity they're in. And they do that 4 times. Well, then the second phase of this program, there's no classrooms. It's all on the job, and the instructor is checking in with them. During that second phase is where they're supposed to build their habits through the repetition of doing these things all the time. Some of the learners don't do that. Some learners don't take that seriously, and they don't internalize that. They don't see it from the vantage point of they see it from, I didn't have time to do that stuff because I was too busy with my work. When in fact, what they're supposed to be seeing is, I'm supposed to be doing my work, and this stuff I've learned is supposed to influence and change how I'm doing my work. They're supposed to overlap and be one and the same. But those that don't see it that way push it off, and they don't then do that. If the only motivation they have is that an instructor is going to check in on me, then they'll do the minimum. They'll punt. They'll make up stuff, write stuff up the day before,
right.
And then you get to the end of the program, and they might just limp across the finish line, but not by much. Whereas when it's clearly understood, this is serious business stuff, and their leader is checking in with them and holding them accountable for expectation of things, that makes huge difference. That now it's treated seriously.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I really appreciate your time and
no
to be able to show that it's possible to do this kind of learning and training and development in these environments. Again, the book is Learning While Working. I mean, the title speaks for itself to me. But I really appreciate your time and your insight. And thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of They Learn, You Win, presented by Skooks. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe in your podcast player. And follow me, David Wentworth, on LinkedIn. I try to distill what works and what doesn't for L&D leaders so you can stay up to speed on the latest insights, ideas, and tech. See you next time.